Hi and welcome to Supporting Children's Grief. Now this video is not to be viewed in isolation but as part of the whole series in the Pink playlist that has been specifically commissioned by the Echo Trust to support adults across their schools. I have had quite a lot of experience working with children with loss and bereavement. I've also done a lot of personal research around it, and I recently attended training with Dr. Margot Sunderland and Stacey Hart from Grief Encounters about helping children to deal with bereavement and traumatic loss. So I'd like to bring some key points from my own practice and also my research and training to help you feel really confident in feeling like you can support the children who have had deaths within their families. I've already made some videos specifically related to grief for both parents and for the children. And you can find them in the blue playlist for parents and the orange playlist for children and their parents to watch together. It would be really helpful for you to signpost the parents to these videos and to watch them with the children so that you can refer to them together, so that you have this shared experience already of beginning to understand what grief is and what loss is. Just very briefly, I want to touch on some of the neuroscience around grief. Naomi Eisenberger has done a huge amount of research into what happens in the brain when we have a loss. Now, this isn't specific to a death or bereavement, but social loss of any kind. They've discovered that the pain centers that light up in our brain when we experience physical pain are the same as what lights up when we experience social loss. Now, the death of a loved one is one of the biggest social losses that we can actually experience. So it's so important to remember that these children are experiencing loss that is the same as physical pain. And for any of you that have had a really close bereavement, you will understand that. The pain in your body, the pain of mourning and bereavement is intense. When children experience social loss, particularly when they experience a close bereavement, they have opioid withdrawal related to the loss of that object or that person or that relationship. Now, this is what heroin addicts experience when they have withdrawal from heroin. It's exactly the same thing. So you can really appreciate the turmoil and the physical and emotional distress that these children are trying to carry every day. If we go back to Panskeep's 7 emotional systems in the mammalian brain that we looked at in the trauma video, our children are going to be operating in the grief emotional system. We can balance this out with the care, because not only are we making them feel safe and secure to express themselves, to start to make meaning of what's happened to them in their hippocampus, we are also helping them to release the feel-good systems, the opioids, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, all these feel-good chemicals in their brains, to start to counteract this huge pain of loss that they are experiencing. It's well known and talked about that grief comes in waves, that we can experience huge, intense periods of pain and emotion, and then a numbing where our brain kind of shuts down a bit to protect us. And these waves can come at any time with any frequency and duration. Another way to think about it is Grief Encounters have developed a way to help children to understand this, but rather than seeing it as waves of periods of normality and then periods of distress, this is called the upward spiral of grief. And it's to be measured over years, so the expectation that grieving lasts forever and that the really painful, difficult parts of it can last for years, and that interspersed within the agony and the distress and the anger and the sadness is happiness and excitement. And that's really, really important for children to know, that they are allowed to feel happy. They are allowed to have moments of joy. A lot of times this isn't made clear, and when children do have these moments, they feel such shame and such guilt about experiencing something nice within their grief. It can make them feel that they don't love the person anymore, or that they shouldn't be allowed, they should be in deep, deep mourning. It's really important we give children permission to know that it's okay. And this upward spiral of grief gives this, but it also shows the level of confusion that runs through it. Many different people have looked into grief and what that actually means and what it is, but I'd just like to show you Worden. From 1996, he developed 4 main tasks of mourning. And as you can see, they are 4 very clear stages, but what's important to know is that they can happen in any order, and we can move fluidly through from one to another. Now, I did a video for the children called "Does Grief Go Away?" and that's really important for you to watch with them as well, so that they have this understanding that their grief is always going to be there. Sometimes it's going to fill them up, and sometimes it won't feel so full because their life will expand around it. There'll be moments when they're experiencing joy and excitement and happiness. But the main thing to understand about us supporting children with grief is that we need to allow them to talk about it. For some reason, when it comes to grieving, there's this idea that if we talk to somebody about it, if we mention the person who died, if we use the word death, we're going to make it worse for the child in some way. We might make them upset. We can't do anything to make that child more upset, particularly if they've lost someone very, very close to them. They're thinking about it all the time. Us talking to them about it isn't going to make them feel worse, it's going to make them feel relieved. When we use words like loss and gone to a better place, it's just really confusing. Use very clear, simple language. I'm really sorry to hear that your granddad died at the lockdown. I'm wondering how that must be for you right now. Make it clear, give the children the permission to know that you can handle it. You are here to handle their pain, and you can hold it for them so that they can express themselves. We know that grief is a tolerable stress. It's a traumatic event, but with the right support, we can help the children to tolerate it. But when we don't talk about grief, when we just expect the child to get on with it, or we don't really give them the permission to express themselves fully because of our own fears around upsetting them or making it feel a bit uncomfortable for other people, their grief becomes blocked stress. In that sense, it becomes a complex trauma. And so we're setting children up for a huge amount of distress and ultimately ill health in the long term. We're not going to be able to fix it for these children who are grieving, but what we can do is start their process of healing. The 10 main needs of grieving children, as shared by Grief Encounters, is to acknowledge and recognise the loss of pain and vulnerability, that fear and anxieties, to contain their fear and anxieties, to help them start to rebuild safe spaces, to give them opportunities to grieve and experience intense emotions over time. So this comes back to us giving them permission and us being brave enough to just hold it without trying to fix them or stop them being in pain. Information to help cognitive understanding and make the unreal real. Empathetic, non-judgmental caring and understanding. To find the language of grief, to address the silence. To find ways of building a new identity and narrative. To find ways to have fun and to laugh. To remember, not to forget, and to reconnect with a dead person. And to rebuild a new kind of normal family. Now, as I said, this isn't something that we can do all of, but we can really start for them to get into this process and begin to address some of these issues. Now, one of the first things to talk about is using really clear, really simple language that doesn't leave any confusion. Now, 2 books that are really helpful with this are Is Daddy Coming Back in a Minute? And What Has Happened to Daddy's Body? Now, these were designed for very young children, but they are helpful for all children. They give an opportunity for children to have questions answered that perhaps are too painful for them to ask the grown-ups that they live with. It gives them the real clear sense of death so that there isn't any confusion. Now, ordinarily, funerals would take place. Whether children attend or not is a personal family matter, but there would have been this big sense of a funeral and what that meant, and people coming together to be able to grieve and find solace with each other. Now, this hasn't been able to happen because of the lockdown, so one of the key things of a funeral is beginning to make it feel real. This hasn't been able to happen for the families, and that has a huge knock-on effect for the children. So for us to bring the reality of death is hugely important. And for children in the primary ages, there is still this magical thinking and non-permanence about death. A really good place to start is chatting to the parents, finding out how the parents are coping, how the family is coping, what kind of grieving processes are taking place at home. You'll be able to gain a lot of information from these very kind of casual, supportive conversations with parents around what's been said, how the parents are acting around the children, and you can signpost them to the videos of support that I have made. What we find as adults is we can't bear the thought of children being in immense pain, so we try to protect them, and this happens particularly around grief. So through our protection, we use different language, we use different kind of stories around death, which actually create a huge amount of confusion. So part of our role is to find out what is the narrative around the death within this family. Are the parents grieving in front of the children? And if so, how is that? Are the children allowed to grieve and to feel at home themselves, so that you know where you're working, you know where you need to help the child to move on. A massive thing with grief is to normalize it. These are such unbearable, intense emotions and painful feelings that the children need to know that this is okay, it's normal. And a great place to do this is to have grief groups where children can feel connected with children that just understand how they're feeling. It's also really important that children have a key adult that they are assigned to, so that on days that are really difficult or difficult parts of the day, they can go and see that adult to do some reading, do some colouring in, to have a chat, to just find that sense of security and connection. Our main role is to provide a really safe, secure base where children feel that we can tolerate their pain, where we can openly use clear language about grief, and we can help them find a language around grief to begin to express themselves. Now, most children have a very poor emotional literary vocab anyway, so a huge thing in our whole class is to really start to explore emotions. This can be really casually done. This can be in informal conversations, as you've broken your pen, just making sure that you express, oh, that's so frustrating, my pen just broken. Making sure that you're naming emotions all the time to not only make them feel more safe, but so that children can use them. When it comes to the language of grief, most adults don't have a language to describe the rawness, the immensity of it. So it's very difficult to try to support a child just by asking, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Can you tell me how you're feeling? Because there aren't the words. So some really powerful ways to help you, whether you're working as a whole class or whether you're in charge of a small grief group or one-to-one work, is to use arts, to use creative expression. These picture cards are called the emotions cards. These are by Dr. Margot Sunderland, and there's a huge range of different positive and negative emotions. But what's brilliant about these are sometimes children have no words, but they can see one of these pictures, they can connect and think, oh my gosh, this is how I'm feeling. And this gives you the opportunity then to start to gently explore that with them and with others and see how other people are feeling. It really helps to bring the words to the feelings. Therapeutic stories are absolutely fantastic as well. So what I'd like to do is share you some of my favourite resources that have been so powerful working with children. Now, some of these are specifically related to grief, and others are more open themes of loss, of sadness, of anxiety. All of these are really, really helpful. These are some mood cards, the emotions mood cards, which are really super. There's loads of them. They all have a different expression on the front and a name of an emotion. But on the back, they have 3 questions to explore and a positive affirmation. So as a whole class, as a group, in small groups, you can really start to explore that specific emotion and think about it in real terms and have really helpful, meaningful discussions around such raw feelings. These therapeutic stories are all huge favourites of mine. They can be used one-to-one. They can be used whole class for really planned activities. But those moments in the day when you can see that someone is really struggling, or they've come to you and they're crying and they're really full of grief, you can find an adult or yourself to go and read one of these with them. It helps them to make sense of what is happening to them, but it's with the safety of it being a book. It's within a metaphor. So it's not so direct as talking about them, but they can connect, and then you can talk about the characters in the book and what maybe the characters might be feeling and what they can do. They're really, really useful. These are some of my top recommendations for working within small grief groups or one-to-one. Muddles, Puddles and Sunshine is a book developed by Winston's Wish, which is a child bereavement charity. It is full of activities to work through from the very beginning to the end of the book that really helps children explore their grief and to find positive ways to start to heal, as well as having the permission to express all the darkness and all the power of it. Draw on Your Emotions is a resource by Dr. Margot Sunderland. Now, this isn't specifically for grief, fantastic for working with children around grief and loss. So you can find the activities in there that seem most relevant to you and your group of children. You can photocopy them off and work through them together. Expressing through creative means is one of the safest but also most limitless way for a child to express their grief. These books are really good for working around grief. The coat I wear is just wonderful. It's the metaphor of wearing a coat of grief and how this child is struggling with it, but how it learns to live with this coat through the help and the support of friends and the adults around it, and how often it can bring great comfort and the child can put their hands in the pockets and bring out things to remember. But it's a really powerful metaphor that's so easy to understand. These 2 books are by Dr. Margot Sunderland again, about longing and loss and yearning, which is exactly what a child does through grieving. So I really recommend these coming into your resources. When it comes to creating a group, it's so important that you have the same group at the same time, on the same day, at the same place. This is because the child is feeling so uncontained and you're exploring these emotions that are really, really scary. Everything else around it has to be so contained and safe by being really consistent so that the child knows exactly what's happening in those elements so that the rest doesn't become so overwhelming. A typical structure for you to use is to have the same starter activity every week for the reasons we've just said. Then reading one of the therapeutic stories, looking at some of the emotion cards, working through some of the books that I've just spoken to you about, and having a discussion with that about those with the children, and then giving them the opportunity to go and have a response to that creatively, whether that's through paint or clay or sand or collage. Creative expression is wonderful with all ages, but with children particularly. They're not reliant on those words, but you as the grown-up can help them bring words to it. So once they've had time for creative expression, you can then help as a group for show and tell. You can ask them some questions about it without becoming too direct. And if a child isn't ready to tell you about their picture or their creation, then that's fine, and you can give them those permissions. Ending the session with the same ending each week. It can often be really nice to end on a really positive note. So these positive affirmation cards are really useful. All the resources I've shown you today are available on Amazon. But bringing something really positive for that child to carry around with them for the rest of that week, so that in moments of difficulty or darkness, they can visualize that card. Whilst it's important for us to help children explore the raw, the dark and the pain of grief, it's more important for us to help them remember, to help them connect with those memories that help keep the person alive. So we can ask them, tell me about your granddad. What was he like? We can help them to remember special memories. To create a memory box is really important. To talk about them, to find ways to bring them back into their life now. And also talking about them is going to bring back those good memories and release those good brain feelings, because they're doing it with us in a really safe and secure way. So remembering to create time to remember. The Echo Trust does have a PSHE rules and policy to making sure that PSHE activities are kept safe. So make sure that you are up to date with that, because these are the rules that you're going to be sharing with your children within this time. The most crucial thing when working with children who are grieving is to make clear how long you're going to be working with them for, and counting that down, because the ending of your relationship, the ending of this a period where they've been able to express themselves and they've found comfort in that through your relationship, to suddenly end with no warning is going to be another bereavement for that child. So it's so important that at the very outset you have decided and made clear with the child how many times this group is going to run for, whether that's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that's set in stone. Create some kind of means to count this down, so that every week before you leave, you check in how many times you've seen each other, how many times you've got left. Now, some people like to do this with a sticker chart. What can be nice is that you create something each time that you check in. So for instance, you can make a bracelet or a necklace using some really chunky beads, and the child can thread one on for each session you're together. So rather than a sense of loss, there's a sense of developing and building something. And at the end of your work together, they actually have something to take away as like a little security object. Be aware that some children are going to find the sessions really difficult. Rather than extending the session itself, because you again need to keep really rigidly to the things that make it safe. So you're working for an hour, and when the hour is up, that session is ended. However, you can take them for a walk into the playground, go and smell the flowers, have some fresh air, go and read another book with them elsewhere, do some colouring in, that can be quite mindful, doing some mindfulness breathing exercises with them, giving them that little extra support. If the child has been removed from their classroom, taking them back to their classroom and letting the TA or teacher know that they need some special jobs to do or some special time with an adult. And that way you're buffering it around the group, but you're keeping everything tight. The main thing to remember is you just being there and willing to accept the child in all their rawness and all the pain, and letting them know that you can handle that. You're not going to fix it for them. You're not going to run away. You're not going to try and use different words that make it feel safe. But you're there. You're holding the pain. You're holding the grief. You're giving them the opportunity to express it, and you're helping them find the meaning around it through words and stories and books. This is so valuable. So be brave. You can't make it any worse. There's nothing for that child that can make it any worse, but you can give them everything they need just by being there.